So let's talk about the midterm exam. I'm using version C because this is a version with the highest number of students. Okay, first, multiple choice. The first one asks, which of these four graphs shows us an increase in quantity demanded while demand stays the same? So this one is pretty simple, right? Because if you want higher quantity demanded, but demand stays the same, then first, the demand cannot change. So the demand line cannot shift. Second, there should be a lower price. So this brings us, which one? So this brings us choice C, right? Because you can see that demand line stays the same and the price decreases. And second one, if price in the market is 14, what would happen? And you can see that 14 is here. So you can see that the quantity supplied would be 70 and the quantity demanded would be 30. And you should choose D here. Suppose the demand for nachos decreases, what will happen to producer's surplus? We know that if demand decreases, then price and quantity will decrease. So if you draw the picture, you can see that if price is here, then this is the producer's surplus. And then if there is a lower price, right, let's say demand decreases, then producer's surplus will be just this blue triangle. So basically producer's surplus would decrease. So you should choose B here. Fourth, suppose a decrease in the price of X results in more of good Y. What are X and Y called? Well, just looking at this problem, you would know that it's the relation between two different goods, right? And we learned that when we are talking about the relation between two goods, then we are thinking about either complementary or substitute. Here you can see that if decrease in the price of X, then you would imagine that the quantity demanded for X will be higher. And then Y's demand actually increases. So you can see that these two goods, they're complementary. So you should choose A here. Okay, fifth. Suppose the incomes of buyers in the market for a normal good increases, and then there is a decrease in the input price to produce the good. What do you would expect? So let's say this is the original demand line and the supply curve. And now let's think about this. The income for normal good increase. This implies the demand for this good should increase. So the demand curve should shift to the right. And then for the supply curve, there is a decrease in the input price. And we know that this will push supply higher, which means supply should shift to the right. And what you can see here is the quantity will for sure be higher and the price will be ambiguous, which means you should choose C here. Okay, 6. Keep Smart University is contemplating decrease in tuition to increase revenue. What must the school believe? So this one is about the relationship between revenue and elasticity. And we learned that if the demand is inelastic, then price and revenue move in the same direction. However, if the demand is elastic, then price and revenue they would move in the opposite direction, which means if you increase your price, revenue will decrease. If you decrease your price, your revenue will increase. And here you can see that the problem tells you that if tuition decreases, the revenue will increase. So this basically implies the demand for education is elastic. Seventh, which of the four pictures represents the market for cars after chips used in making cars become more expensive? So here you can see that first you would understand only supply curve will shift. Second, it says input price increases. So you should see that the supply curve should shift to the left. And looking at all these pictures, you can see that the fourth choice is the correct one. So you should choose D here. Okay. With the tax imposed in this market, what would consumer surplus be? So you can see that the tax is this wedge driven between the demand curve and the supply curve. So with this wedge, consumer would have to pay 16 and producers will have to just receive $6. So the consumer surplus would be just this little triangle here. So it should be 22 times 16 times 300 divided by 2, which is what? I guess it's 900. Okay, suppose that good X has a positive income elasticity of demand. What does it imply about the good? Well, this is a very basic question. We know that if it's normal good, then its income elasticity should be positive. If it's an inferior good, then it should have a negative income elasticity of demand. So you would see that you should choose A here. If the labor supply curve is almost flat, what will a tax on labor do? So first, recall what we have learned in the class, right? We know that if a demand or supply is flatter, then we would say it's more elastic. And we also learned that if the elasticity is larger, then the deadweight loss will be larger. So basically you can see that here the labor supply is very elastic. With the tax, we would see that the deadweight loss will be very large. In this case, you can see that you should just choose A here. Okay, 11th. Holding all other factors constant, if raising the price of a good results in more total revenue, what must the demand for the good be? Well, this one is actually pretty much the same with the previous one. And you can see that it says if price increase, then revenue increase. This implies that this demand is actually inelastic, right? So you should choose B here. Okay, 12. Suppose there is a early warm season in California that is good for the lemon crop. What happens to the consumer surplus in the market for lemons? So it says weather is good for lemon, which means supply should increase, right? So this implies supply should shift to the right. And you can see that we will have a lower price. And we have learned from the lecture note, if price is lower, then the consumer surplus should be higher. So we should choose A here. Okay, 13. Which is the most likely result of imposing a minimum wage above a market's equilibrium wage. I think this is very basic, and we discussed this in the lecture. And we know that the general consensus, sorry, I should not use the word consensus. The general result in this competitive labor market is if there is a binding minimum wage, then there would be a labor shortage. And labor shortage basically means, there should be a labor surplus. The labor surplus basically means the quantity supplied is larger than quantity demanded. And because there is a surplus of labor, this essentially means there will be unemployment. So here we should choose A. Okay, 14th. Lauren and Amy sell lemonade on a street corner. Each glass costs them 5 cents to make. At the end of the day, they have sold 50 glasses and received a total producer surplus 12.5. What are Lauren and Amy selling each glass for? So we know that producer's surplus equals the price received by the producer minus the cost. So here we know the total surplus is actually 12.5, and price is something we want to solve, and then each glass has a cost of 5 cents, and they have sold 50 glasses. So if you plug in these numbers, then you can see that P should be equal to 0.3. Okay, 15. What does a binding price ceiling cause? We learned about this in our class, right? So if a price ceiling is binding, then we would know that the price will be lower than the equilibrium price, which means there will be a shortage, that is at a price which is lower than the equilibrium price. The demand will be strong, but the supply will be weak, which means the quantity demanded is larger than quantity supplied, so there will be a shortage. Okay. 16. Lincoln offers to do Kathleen's housework for $80 per week, and Kathleen's opportunity cost of doing housework is $100 per week, and Lincoln's opportunity cost of doing housework is $50 per week. And then the question is, what will be Lincoln's gain in producer surplus as a result of this transaction? Well, again, we know that producer surplus equals the price you receive minus the cost of the production. So here, Lincoln's cost is 50, and the price he receives would be 80. So you can see that the difference is the producer surplus. It should be 30. Okay. 17. Currently, you purchase 6 packages of hot dogs per month. You will lose your job, and you will have to, and you will have no income from January. You have no plans to purchase hot dogs in January. What are hot dogs for you? So here, what you can see here is, basically you will see a decrease in your income because you will lose job. And then after your income decreases, you will not purchase hot dogs anymore. So there will be a decrease in the quantity demanded. So basically you can see that hot dogs for you are a normal good, because if your income decreases, your quantity demanded also decreases. So this is exactly the definition for the normal good. 18. Calvin buys a new tractor for $125,000. He receives a consumer surplus of $0 on his purchase. What is Calvin's willingness to pay? Well, this one is simple, right? Because we know that consumer surplus equals willingness to pay minus the price paid by the consumer. So the answer here is B or C, because they're essentially the same. Okay, 19th. Last month, sellers of good Y took in $150 and sold 50 units of Y. This month, sellers of good Y raised the price, took in 160 and sold 40 units of Y. At the same time, the good of X stayed the same, but sales of good X decreases from 40 units to 20 units. What we can conclude about good Y and X? So here we're looking at calculating the cross price elasticity. And what we will do is, again, we will use this middle point method. And what you can see here is, so let's first look at the quantity change in good X. So you can see that the change in good X is, let's see. Okay, so it decreases from 40 to 20, right? And we are using middle point method. So the denominator here we use would be 30. And price. So it says, last month, sellers of good Y took in 150 and sold 50 units, which means the price is 3. And this month, the price is 4, right? So you can see that it's 4 minus 3, and then the middle point would be 3.5. And if you do the calculation, you can see that it's 2.33. And you can also see that they are complements, because you can see that if the quantity of good Y decreases from 50 to 40, then the quantity of good X also decreases, right? So you can see that these two goods, X and Y, they're complements. Okay, 20. Suppose you make jewelry, and if the price of silver increases, what we would expect you to do? So first, obviously, silver is the input for jewelry. So here we're looking at a producer's problem, that is, the input price increases. And we have learned that if input price decreases, then supply would actually shift to the left. But if you're looking at these four choices, you don't have the choice of decreasing. You don't have the choice of decrease the supply or supply shifts to the left. However, if you look at choice A, it says the seller will be willing and able to produce less jewelry than before at each possible price. So this is equivalent to say supply decreases. The reason is because if you draw a line here, right? Let's say the price is $10. Then you can see that originally, maybe the seller would want to sell 100 pieces of jewelry. But after this change, this increase in the price of silver, at price of 10, the seller will only be able to and only wanted to sell 10 pieces, right? So you can see that choice A essentially says price decreases. Okay, now let's look at these short answers. So for 21, most people got A and B right. For completeness, so let me still solve this. So if you make the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied the same, you can solve the equilibrium price, which is 40. And then if you plug this $40 back to either quantity supplied or to either the supply curve or the demand curve, you will get the equilibrium quantity as 50. And then for the third question, it says if the government impose a price ceiling of 3, what is the quantity demanded? So in this case, you can see that this is the binding price ceiling, right? Because price ceiling essentially means the maximum price you can charge. And you can see that, I think I made a mistake. The equilibrium price should be 5. And here you can see that the $3 price ceiling is lower than the equilibrium price. So it is binding, which means in this case, the quantity demanded is 100 minus 10 times 3, which is 70. And now problem E. I think a lot of people got problem E wrong. So here, the government imposes a price ceiling of 7. What is the quantity demanded? A lot of people just say, okay, I have the demand equation, and then I just plug in this number 7 as the price, so this gives me 30. But this is not correct because you can see that here the price ceiling of $7 is higher than the equilibrium price. So it is a non-binding price ceiling. And in this case, the price should stay the same. It should stay at $5. So under this $5 price, the quantity demanded is still 50. Okay, so 22 is about considering how equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity will change. And the key to solve this problem is you have to figure out how supply curve and demand curve will change. Okay, so let's look at these 4 different scenarios. A says, suppose there is a supply chain disruption, then the computer chips used to make computers become more expensive. And what is the change in the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity? So here you can see that input price increases, which means supply will decrease. And we know that if supply decreases, equilibrium price will increase and equilibrium quantity will increase. And B says due to the pandemic, Canadians start to prefer remote working and they're moving to cities. Let's say a lot of them are moving to Winnipeg because it's cheaper here. How the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity of houses will change in Winnipeg. So here you can see that what changes is really this demand curve. And demand curve will shift to the right, which means normally it means quantity will be larger and price will be higher, right? However, I have this further assumption here. I assume the supply curve is vertical, which means even demand increases, quantity should stay the same, right? So here, the quantity would stay the same. Okay. C says Canada has issued staying at home order and lockdowns, airlines are forced to cut flights, how the equilibrium price and quantity of flights will change. So in this case, you have two changes, demand change and supply change. Demand will be lower because Canada has issued staying at home order, so people cannot really just go out and fly. And then airlines are forced to cut flights, so supply will be lower. And in this case, what we are looking at is because of decreasing in demand, price will decrease, quantity will decrease. And because of the decrease in supply, price will increase, quantity will decrease. And if you combine these two effects, you will see that quantity will decrease, but the price will be ambiguous. Okay, D, it says, winter is coming and it's colder than ever. Canada Goose, it's this winter clothing maker, finds a cheaper way to make winter clothing. How the equilibrium price and quantity of winter clothing will change. So here, winter is colder than ever, which means there is an increased preference for winter clothing from the perspective of consumers. So demand should increase. And then the producer finds a cheaper way to make the product. So in this case, you can see that supply will increase. And you can see that if demand increases, then price will change. Price will increase. Quantity will increase. And if supply increases, price will decrease, quantity will increase. And if you combine these two effects, then you would see that quantity will increase and price will be ambiguous. Okay, 23, we have this table which tells you how many cars and how many milk you can make. Now, B says, what is the opportunity cost of producing 1 gallon of milk? Well, it's pretty simple. You could just pick two pairs. And you can see that if you produce 6,000 gallons of milk, you have to give up 300 cars, right? Because if you increase from 0 to 6,000, then cars decrease from 300 to 0. And this will give you a number of, I think it's 0.5. And then C says, okay, there is a better technology to get milk. And to be more specific, you will get twice as much. And now, what is the opportunity cost of producing 1 gallon of milk? Well, think about this. Previously, if you produce 6,000 gallons of milk, you will give up 300 cars. And now the productivity is just like twice better, right? 2 times better. This essentially means if you give up 12,000 gallons of milk, you will have to give up 300 cars. So here, the answer is 0.025. Okay, 24. Well, 24 is actually pretty simple. It's really just this modified homework problem. Okay, A says, I would never buy an economics textbook because I hate economics. Well, this one is pretty simple. It says, no matter what is the price of the economics textbook, your quantity demanded is always 0, which means the elasticity is 0, and of course it's inelastic. Okay, B says, Apple price increases 10% and total sales of Apple decreased by 20%. Oh, this one is simple, right? You could just directly use these two numbers. So the elasticity is 2 and it's elastic. C says my customers are very loyal and I will keep 90% of my customers if I raise my price as much as 20%. So it basically means if you increase your price by 20%, you will lose 10% customer, right? So it should be 10% divided by 20%, which give you 0.5. So it's inelastic. Okay, I think a lot of people got these D and E wrong. So let's look at them. I will buy one copy of Billie Eilish's album, no matter how much it sells for, because I am a big fan of her. So in this case, you can see that your elasticity is 0 here because your quantity is fixed no matter what is the price. So it is elastic. Sorry, it is inelastic. And then he says this ramen noodles are tasty, so the restaurant will earn the same revenue even if it raises its ramen price. So here it basically says if the seller increases the price, then revenue would stay the same. And we learned this from both the lecture note and homework. If the elasticity is 1, then the revenue would stay the same even if there is a price change. So in this case, you can see that elasticity is 1, so it's unit elastic. Okay, the last question. A is pretty simple. It says the government wants to impose tax, and there are two goods, X and Y, and X has really elastic demand and Y has inelastic demand. So if the government wants to minimize deadweight loss, which good should they tax? Well, this is just the direct application of the result we got from the lecture note, right? We know that if the demand or supply is more elastic, then the deadweight loss will be larger. This essentially means, in this case, if you have a choice, then you should tax the good with inelastic demand. So here you should tax you should tax good Y. Okay, B. A lot of people got B wrong. When I was designing this midterm exam, I thought B was actually pretty simple, but in the end, I guess it's not. Okay, so let's look at this problem. So it says John has been in the habit of mowing Wilma's lawn each week, and John's opportunity cost is 15, and Wilma would be willing to pay 30. What is the maximum tax the government can charge without discouraging John and Wilma from continuing their manually beneficial arrangement? So this problem is modified from the text bank. I have to say, yeah, its language is kind of, I don't know, very redundant. It's not straightforward. So the question here basically asks, if we still want this transaction to continue, what is the possible largest possible tax? So what you can see here is the willingness to pay of the buyer is 30, and the opportunity cost of the seller is 15. So you can see that there is a so you can see that there is a total surplus of 15. And the best the government can do is to just charge a tax equal to this total surplus. And in this case, you can see that by charging a tax of 15, then both the consumer and the seller, they will have exactly zero surplus. So they're really indifferent between whether going on with this transaction or canceling this transaction. So that's the maximum tax the government can charge. And you can see that if the government charges 15.1, then there will be a negative total surplus if the transaction continues. So in this case, definitely there will be no further lawn mowing arrangement. And you can also see that if the government only charges 14.9, then there is still additional $0.1 benefit for this government to extract by using tax. So the maximum possible tax the government can charge without discouraging the buyer and the seller is just $15.